What has happened to Canada? Housing in Canada, at least most of Canada, is impossibly expensive for young people. This is a legitimate emergency that has largely gone ignored. Sure, there may be a headline about it here or there, but what are we actually doing to fix this? A few headlines or a few minor changes to some tax codes is not going to put a dent in this problem. Recently, Canada's current leadership has been speaking about this cost of housing issue, but it is already so unbelievably out of control. If you live in the Greater Toronto Area and you work an average job, in all likelihood, you will never own a home if you do not currently own one. The average home price in the Greater Toronto Area is over $1 million. A recent study called Straddling the Gap 2022 showed it will take you a whopping 27 years to save up enough money for a 20% down payment if you earn an average salary. If you go outside of the Greater Toronto Area, but still in Ontario, it will take you only 22 years to save up for a home. The median salary in Ontario is $51,000 before taxes, and the average home price is $920,000. These numbers are so far apart that it's almost laughable. So, without financial support from relatives, you will likely never own a home. In fact, more than 40% of first-time homebuyers in Ontario received financial help from their parents, with the average help being over $70,000. So if you live in Canada's largest province, you better either have wealthy parents or find out a way to make a significantly above average salary. Not only do you need to earn this high salary, but you have to figure out how to do so early on in life. And we are just talking about basic home ownership here. We are not talking about becoming a multimillionaire or having a lavish lifestyle. Just to get your foot in the door and buy an average home, you either need rich relatives or to be an exception to the rule, earnings-wise, relatively early in life. To compare how difficult it is for people who are young who live in Ontario to purchase a home, it only took the baby boomer generation 5 years to save up for a 20% down payment. And again, now it takes 27 in the GTA or 22 in Ontario in general. This is wrong. You should not have a country where your average citizen has almost no chance to achieve independence and financial freedom via home ownership. People should not be forced to pay rent forever, which, by the way, has unsurprisingly been skyrocketing alongside home prices to over $2,000 a month nationally in a supposedly wealthy and developed country. If you work an average job and have no destructive financial habits, it should not be nearly impossible to own a home. Now, you could just say to any individual person, oh, you have to earn more than the average then. But this policy or this idea will not work for a country. Most people inside of a country cannot earn an above average salary by definition. The situation is even worse on Canada's west coast in the province of British Columbia. The average home price of the entire province, not just Vancouver and surrounding area, but the entire province, is just shy of $1 million at $967,000. And the median salary in BC is actually a little less than Ontario at just $50,000 a year before tax. Ontario and British Columbia combined make up 50% of the country's population. So right there you have half the country with homes that are incredibly out of reach for the average person. To get away from these ridiculously high home prices, many people from Ontario and British Columbia have began moving to Calgary, Alberta, which is a city of roughly 1.3 million people located near the Rocky Mountains and Banff National Park. However, because of this influx of new people escaping high home prices, the Calgary mayor has just declared a housing crisis of their own as the costs of homes in Calgary have risen in the last year. Since 2021 in Calgary, rent is up 40% and the median home price of a single detached home has risen 37%. Looking outside of Ontario, BC, and Calgary, if you happen to be born in Quebec or grew up speaking French, you can somewhat reasonably afford to live in Quebec. It will still take you 11 years, still twice as long as it took baby boomers, to afford a 20% down payment for the average home in Quebec, but at least this is somewhat attainable. And Quebec is Canada's second largest province. Quebec has over 8 million people and makes up just over 20% of Canada's population. Home prices in Quebec are below the national average, But the major hurdle for people potentially living in Quebec is that Quebec is a French-speaking province. Anywhere outside of Montreal, you will have a tough time integrating into the community and a harder time finding a job without fluent French. I suppose if you work fully remotely, you could choose to live in Quebec, but it will be difficult to integrate yourself into daily life. Montreal, the largest city in Quebec, could potentially be an option as it's a largely bilingual city. But the average home price here has risen 6% in the last year to just shy of $600,000. This is not as expensive as Ontario or British Columbia, but it's still out of reach for somebody earning the median salary in Quebec. Also, Quebec as a province does not want Montreal to become a predominantly English-speaking city. The current premier of Quebec has recently passed legislation to strengthen the French language and restrict the use of English. There are currently some employers who work in English in Montreal, but most prefer workers who speak fluent French. So again, Montreal could be an option, as you can get away with English most of the time in your daily life, but it's definitely optimal if you speak French. So overall, learning French and moving to Quebec, whether it be Montreal or somewhere else in the province, could be something that you do, but this will be very difficult. So aside from Ontario, British Columbia, Quebec, and Calgary, you now have 20% of Canada that you could move to from a population standpoint. Again, unless you can speak fluent French. Under 9 million people out of Canada's total of 40 million people live outside of Ontario, Quebec, BC, and Calgary. So, if you are a young person who does not have wealthy parents and you do not earn a significantly above average amount of money, you are basically forced to move to this 20% of the country if you want a path toward home ownership. So you'll have towns and smaller cities in the prairies and the maritime provinces to choose from. These are nice cities for sure. The people are generally friendly in these places, but there is less to do and the winters are much harsher than in somewhere like British Columbia or Southern Ontario. Still, these towns and smaller cities can offer a good life and a realistic path to home ownership. But as we are seeing throughout all of Southern Ontario, British Columbia, and now Calgary, Gen Z and millennial Canadians are running out of places to flee in order to find affordable homes and a good quality of life. On top of the life-altering event that is moving to another city, and Canadians watching this will know, Canada is a massive country. Moving from Ontario to Alberta, for example, is almost the same as moving to an entirely different country. This distance will make it difficult to visit your friends and family regularly. It is not possible to drive home for a weekend between many Canadian cities, so in all likelihood, you will have to fly. So adding to the challenges of starting a new life around new people, Canada is one of the most expensive countries on earth to fly nationally, which will make it harder to visit your hometown for a weekend to see your friends and family. This chart ranks the cost of domestic travel, the cost per 60 miles. And as we mentioned, Canada is massive, the second largest country on earth by size. So it is one of the most expensive countries on earth to fly domestically in. However, at the time this video is being recorded, flights are the cheapest I have ever seen within Canada. So hopefully flights stay this affordable, but I don't know, we will see. To further illustrate the magnitude of this problem, this housing problem in Canada, in America right now, there is a housing crisis as well. But Canada's housing crisis is much, much worse, and it's not even really that close. The average Canadian earns about 25% less than the average American, as America's GDP per capita and purchasing power is 25% higher roughly than Canada's. And the average Canadian home is 25% more expensive than the price of the average American home. The typical home in Canada costs about $757,000, which converts to around $559,000 US. And the average American home costs $460,000 US. So the average American earns more money than the average Canadian and has homes that are more affordable. Yet they are still claiming, and they are correct, that they're in a housing crisis. So if America has a housing crisis, what do we have in Canada? A super housing crisis? Can we even use the same phrase? The next brief part of this video probably sounds political, but that is not the intention. It is simply to highlight that young people in Canada have been misled about what the greatest issues in their lives are. In Canada, we have been told that the biggest problems in our world are things like climate change, reducing our nation's carbon footprint, or whatever social issue is popular at the given time. How is somebody working full-time while living in their parents' basement or living in a condo with two other roommates supposed to seriously believe that the biggest issue in their life is climate change? Come on. I am not trying to make this video about social issues or about the environment, but my point is that Canada, in recent years, is more concerned with appearing to be a great place to live and less concerned about actually being one. We are recently coming out of a 2-year-long quarantine with on and off lockdowns for the COVID state of emergency, one of the longest quarantines of any country on earth. But where is the emergency for the young person working 40 hours a week who is decades away from saving enough money for just the down payment on a home? Are they supposed to pay high rents and have roommates for their entire lives? Should they not have a realistic path to home ownership? Is this not an emergency? Or should these young people just be happy with an iPhone and an internet connection? Should Gen Z and millennial Canadians wait around for this to hopefully be fixed in the short to medium term? Is this worth the risk? Or should they just pack up and find another country to build their life? Thank you everyone for watching. Please comment your thoughts below.